Not cold.
Ah.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it works. Right.
And you're now being recorded.
Apparently I'm going to be recorded.
You are.
I am being
You are.
recorded.
Yep.
Right. It's only just started recording.
From the moment that popped up.
Right.
So
I didn't say it.
Don't say what you didn't say.
I made some disparaging comment about a national entertainer,
okay.
which I have withdrawn, but they say, no, it was on record. It wasn't on record, so bad luck. Oh, Johnny.
I'm sorry.
Right.
Hey. That's the first one.
Right, I don't need to look at notes this time. I've memorised it all. So, what I want to do this week is look at what it actually makes a town. Weston had moved from being a village to becoming a town, and there's one hell of a difference between a village and a town. What makes a town? Why, when we go to one town, we think, oh, that's a nice place, I'd like to live there. We go to another place and we think, oh, what a godforsaken hole this is. But people who live there may not think that. So there are the various things which make a town what it is, the institutions of a town. It all started here in 1842. An Act of Parliament was created, and it was, I quote, for the paving, lighting, watching, which means police, cleansing and other improvements, and for establishing a market. So that is Parliament saying, hey, you people in Weston-super-Mare, there are enough of you now to begin to rule yourselves. We'll get rid of the old order of the Lord of the Manor, the church wardens, the vestry. We will create a new democratic way of running the town. It's reasonably democratic, not by today's standards, but certainly by those standards. 18 well-appointed local men, and of course it was men in those days, who were prominent in the town, largely in terms of business, became town commissioners. Nowadays we would call them councillors, but they were the appointed 18 good local people who were considered worthy enough to stand to be commissioners for Weston-super-Mare. And they elected from amongst their 18 Francis Hutchinson Synge, wonderful name, to be chairman. So he was, if you like, the first. He wasn't a mayor, but from him right the way through up to whoever's the mayor this year, or the chairman of Somerset this year, it's been a successive generation of people running. And the clerk who was appointed was one Henry Davis, an important person in the development of Weston. This is where we begin to see some individual people who establish their mark on Weston. Now, most people who run things in a town or city, they come, they go, they disappear into history, they're never heard of again, and they've achieved absolutely nothing. But occasionally, somebody arises who does have some importance, and that person is responsible for creating whatever has helped to shape a particular place. And we'll see how some of these people helped create Weston. So 1842 then is the important date. The urban institutions now. I reckon these are the sorts of things which make a town tick, for better or for worse. There is the civic side to a town, the social side. I mean, nobody wants to live in a town to be a social isolate. You may as well go and live in the middle of nowhere for that. Towns are about social order, aren't they? Religion. One of the things in history we should not do is judge the past by today's standards. So whilst church going is of precious little significance today in the way in which it would order the way in which a town operates, way back in the early and mid-19th century, it was important because of the way people associated with different branches of Christianity in this country. Then we have the cultural approach to a town. We all like to see cultural offerings, don't we? Be it theatre, be it restaurants, be it cinemas, whatever. That's part of our culture. There are the professional institutions. By professional, I mean all sorts of work. People will come together quite naturally in the way in which they work. So you may finish your day at work, but your friends will often be the people you work with, and so you might go out to dinner occasionally, or go for a drink or meet up. These institutions then move across into the social order. Educational, that's part of the way in which a town has its institutions, and even protective, the way in which we have expectations of the law, the police, medical care, fire brigades, all the rest of it. This is all part and parcel of an urban existence. And one of the things, of course, that is symptomatic of a town, much more so than a village, not that we've got any villages left now. People who say they live in villages in this country, well, they don't get any cow manure on their Wellington boots. Their Wellington boots are usually polished green for Saturday afternoon walking. Very few people who live in villages are village people. They're people who've moved out of Bristol and live in Coventry and then moan if somebody else comes to live there. It's a different world. But towns were very often, and are still very often, about rising through the different strata that might be associated with the various institutions of the town. And I rather like the three Ronnies thing, the tall one looking down, I'm middle class, I'm looking down on you because you're middle class. Person in the middle class, I'm looking down on you because you're working class, but actually I'm looking up to you because you're upper class. And the poor little one at the bottom, well, no hope in hell. It's all about climbing ladders and feeling good in what you do. So this is part of it, and it's about getting on with different people. We all know in towns that there are certain institutions that people will associate with and make themselves terribly important in those institutions. Some of them may be charitable, some of them may be there ostensibly for the promotion of their businesses, and they have dinners once a month, or they meet in secret, or whatever. But it's all about being seen to rise in a particular social circle that you work in, you live in, you have your being in. So this is part of it. It's always been so. It doesn't matter whether we're talking of urban living in the Roman Empire, or we're talking about urban living in 19th century Weston, or indeed, but to a different extent, in Weston in 2017. Well, here is good old Francis Hutchinson Synge, a picture in the museum. I'm sure he approved of this painting. It's always a bit worrying whether paintings are actually true to life, or whether, if you're the client, you are paying the artist to create what you like about yourself, and therefore you're telling me, oh, yes, I'll accept this one because I'm looking rather grand. But in fact, he was a very significant player in Weston. There he is holding that 1842 Act. So here is the Act of Parliament making Weston a town. He is sitting there with that Act. He is responsible for it. And there, in the picture, is the posed inkwell and quill. So he is responsible now for ensuring the future of Weston. And out through the window, there is the world that he and his commissioner chums are setting out to establish. But it was all very well creating the town of Weston-super-Mare, but half the landowners decided they didn't want to be in it because a rate was being levied. Does anything change? No. Everybody wants the advantage of whatever's coming, but actually I don't want to pay for it. Let somebody else pay for it. And so the people who lived at that end of town, in the Whitecross area, they decided they didn't want to be part of Weston-super-Mare because they would have to pay to be part of Weston. They weren't interested in the advantages that would accrue from being in Weston, they just didn't want to pay for anything. And so they stayed outside Weston for a decade, until 1861, when you'll see at the bottom there, the Whitecross estate actually came then within the Commissioner's jurisdiction. First meeting of the commissioners was held on the 7th of May in 1842 in a pub. So here is good British democracy starting in the back room of a bar behind the Plough Inn in High Street. That was the first. Very quickly, of course, the commissioners became terribly important, and the idea of meeting in a pub just wasn't on. So they moved from there to the gas committee room, which might or might not have been an appropriate name for them to meet in. And then, 1848, Mr. Francis Hutchinson Synge provided, and I quote, he was thanked for his great liberality, kindness and public spirit in the erection of so commodious and convenient a building as the new town hall, which he has provided at so great a personal sacrifice for the use of the public. It was a little room, a little building behind the Plough Hotel. I'll show you on a map. And it had been a former chapel, I think, and he set it up as the first town hall, and that's where the meetings were held. Then, 1851, the Westminster Improvement and Market Act was passed. 1853, the Waterworks Act. So here, Weston was beginning to acquire the rights to provide the services for people living in the town. And it's funny when we think back to the idea that nobody actually provided water, nobody actually cleaned the streets. And then the commissioners were beginning to start to do that. 1856, we decided that we needed a cemetery. 1856 again, plans for a new town hall above the Market House. The Market House, I'll show you in a minute, in High Street North, but that plan was abandoned. Then there was another plan to build the town hall on the site of Sackville House. Sackville House was demolished. That became Lloyd's Bank, and so the town hall was not built there. Then 1858, plans for a new town hall at what was considered to be the town's southeastern extremity, where the present town hall is. And there's a story behind that. 1859, the commissioners become the Board of Health, so taking on more responsibilities. And as I say, 1861, the Whitecross Estate is added. So within really a decade, things were really moving ahead. Commissioners were providing services, charging a rate for the provision of those services. First town hall then is behind the Plough Hotel. The Plough Hotel was taken down in 1937. It was replaced by Marks and Spencer's. So if you walk down High Street and see M&S, not that building was blown up in war. This is a post-war development. But it's there that the Plough Hotel, and tucked behind the Plough Hotel was that first town hall. This map is interesting. This map shows High Street in 1848. Now, if you look very close, I can't use the point because it doesn't show up on this, but this is Big Lamp Corner. This is Regent Street, or Watersill Road as it then was. Meadow Street coming off down here through the old meadow, and Watersill Lane, or later Locking Road, out to what is now the Odeon about there. This is High Street, coming up to what today is the Italian Gardens, and Veranda House, which I showed you a couple of weeks ago, there was taken down for the post office at the end of the 19th century, which was taken down again to be replaced by the Sovereign Centre. There would be Cecil Walker's today. And some of us will remember the little covered avenue of shops, the Royal Arcade, being bombed in the war, unfortunately, never. That's where that is. Now, behind here, there was a labyrinth of little streets, little cottages, little buildings, and the original town hall was one of those buildings. It's all been swept away. The labyrinth of streets has gone, and the cottages have gone. High Street, which was then very narrow, has been widened. So all of these properties, which have numbers, have gardens in front of them. So you've got to use your imagination as you walk down High Street. Properties with a little further back, front gardens, and the road much narrower. Remember, High Street was only wide enough for a single cart. So it was a very narrow street. But the shape of High Street has not changed. It's got this slight kink coming down, and that is a centuries-old line. So even though all the shops are relatively modern, the line of the street is not. Second suggestion for the town hall, 1856, above what was then the market house, or became the market house. The market house burnt down and has been replaced by the playhouse. But this is what it was like. Here you can see before the fire in 1963, 5. Somebody correct me. It's certainly mid 60s, 60, 65. I think. The playhouse is here. You can see the buildings here. This wonderful terrace of Somerset buildings, all designed in that flamboyant way by Hans Fowler Price. And in here was Weston Market. The early town commissioners had the right to establish a market. And of course, in those days, markets were proper markets, not these make-pretend things we call farmers' markets, which were only giving you the ability to buy potatoes at twice the price you'd normally pay for them because they've got earth on them. But these were proper markets. The cattle were slaughtered in here. The chickens had their necks wrung in here, and the blood flowed in here. This was a proper market, and that's where everybody would have gone. When it ceased to be a market, it turned out all sorts of things, eventually becoming a theatre. So the playhouse operated inside the old market house until it burnt down. The show which was on at the time, No Time for Love. Well, obviously there wasn't. It went a lovely story. Eric Hopkinson, who was a writer for the. I'm going off on a tangent again. Eric Hopkinson, who wrote for the Evening Post, was their theatre correspondent, and he was a really nice chap, but particularly lazy. So instead of going to the theatre, he used to just get hold of the programmes, write up the notes, send them up the wire to Bristol so they'd print them. And he did this for the Playhouse. And the editor phoned him up and said, "You enjoyed the show then?" Yes, really good. Yes, I said, "Anything else happened?" No. Oh, you missed the fire, did you? Dear old Eric. But it went up in flames. And that really was the end of it. It could have been rebuilt, but it would have been so expensive. The insurance company insisted the new theatre was built on that site. Otherwise, the insurance money would not have been paid, which is why the theatre had to be built in sort of very constricted, actually built quite well, given the constriction of that site. But the frontage, unfortunately, was lost. I mean, that history is gone. Inside, it's very interesting because if you look at this photograph, this is from a burned out shell. Look at the window formation. And before it became the theatre, when it was still the market, look at the top left. You can see those windows again. It's a very much tighter street network in Weston then. So the original market house, and of course the name market house is immortalised, if that's the right word, by the pub opposite, which is the new market inn, the old market inn, the closed market inn, whatever. Here then was the third suggestion: build a town hall on Sackville House. Get rid of Sackville House, build a town hall. Sackville House was demolished, but Lloyd's Bank went up instead on that side. So here we've got Lloyd's Bank before, of course, the war, when a rather nice facade there was lost in the war. The actual town hall, the town hall that we have known and grown to love and appreciate, and all the decisions which are made in it are there to warm the cockles of our hearts. It was actually given to Weston. This is a stone inside the main chamber in the town hall. It was given to Weston by the Archdeacon of Wells, who was the rector of Weston, whose dad was the bishop. Bishop of Bath and Wells. In those days, as I said before, it was quite often bishops awarded plum livings to their sons. That was the way things were done. But it's interesting in Weston because Henry Davis, who was the clerk to the council, just happened to own a piece of land on the outskirts of Weston, which would have been ideal for a new town hall. So he proposed the town hall should be erected on his field. There was a tremendous outcry in Weston. In good old Western tradition, moan, groan, no, we're not going to do it, no, you're going to make a packet out of this, no, we don't want that. This would just be civic agrandissement and nothing else. And there was hell to pay. You read some of the ridiculous letters in the Mercury nowadays, compared with then, they are so tame. People in Victorian days really knew how to spit venom. Far more effectively than we do now. And the letters in the paper, the complaints, the accusations were appalling. Archdeacon Law called a public meeting. There was disorder. There was rioting. Archdeacon Law said, right, this town is growing. We need a town hall. This is part of our civic development. There's only one way that this can be provided. I will pay for it. And everyone cheered. So Weston-super-Mare managed to get its town hall without paying a penny for it, because the rector of Weston, Archdeacon Law, was rich enough. Remember, he was the Ellenborough family, the viceroys of India. He was rich enough to pay for it. So the answer is that you cause enough trouble and get somebody who's wealthy enough to finance a thing, then you get the advantage of it without paying for it. So Weston has recently lost a trick or two in that. So here's the memorial tablet in the council chamber in the town hall. Here is Archdeacon Law, rector of Weston, and of course immortalised in the Great East window at St John's Church. That's his father's coat of arms. The Law, Ellenborough arms on the right, are halved with the diocesan arms of St Andrew, Bath and Wells on the left. This is the fourth and final plan. This is the 1858 plan for the town hall. Notice there's another church there. That's the second church to be built in Weston, Emmanuel Church, which had been built just a few years before the town hall. So here we are on the very edge of Weston. Town hall is designed by James Wilson, Bath architect, very well-known architect, regional architect, not of national significance. And he built in this sort of Italianate style. It's still the basis of the present town hall, but this is the 1858 show, which is then extended by Hans Fowler Price in 1898. You can see what Price has done. He's stuck this bit on the front, and it's this bit that became his new council chamber upstairs. The original clock tower is here, and the Gothic facade it's a bit of a mishmash of Gothicized Italianate architecture, but it's an interesting building. But of course, things never stay stationary, do they? As a town increases, as administration increases, the need for office space increases, and so the town hall once again has to be extended. So have a look at that 1890. Let's just pop back and see before it's extended there. So here's the 1858, 1898, and that's from the Locking Road side. Then, in 1929, local architects Fry, Paston and Jones incorporate this rather more classical design, which is referred to by some architects as being post office Georgian, which I rather like that phrase. But you can see in terms of architecture, it doesn't relate at all to that, but so what? This is the modern being attached to the old. A bit like this building is attached to the Winter Gardens. The new is attached to the old, and it blends in. Interestingly enough, the clock tower is then surrounded by the rest of the town hall, so it's no longer the great feature it was. At one point, it had a full peal of bells. But I'm led to believe in the 1950s office workers got so fed up with the noise from the bells that they took the bells out. A great pity. If I had lots and lots of money and I could convince the council to waste money, I'd say, well, let's get another peal of bells in there. But I don't think that would get through, would it? And this is the what is now referred to, of course, as the old town hall. But it actually looks like a town hall, doesn't it? This is an interesting thing. Here is a building that went up during an era of civic pride. And if you have civic pride, you make a statement. Your front door makes a statement. To go into the town hall, you are going into something rather grand. Okay, it's not Manchester. a really impressive North Country town, but it is still of significance. Later on, as more and more office development was needed, so the area immediately around the town hall came up for grabs. Town hall there, Emmanuel Church here, the Albert Memorial Hall here, which is part of the Emmanuel Church, and this is Walliscote Grove Road there, and the car park there. That comes up for grabs. The council acquires it. This really rather attractive building. But you know, it's water under the bridge, so let's not dwell on that. That went and was replaced in 1980 by this new town hall extension in brick well, I leave you to judge. The entrance far less impressive. That was the end. That's no longer the entrance, but that was then the entrance. Almost an apologetic entrance rather than an entrance which is making a statement of certainty. Changed yet again, and this is the latest entrance, which everybody realised was making absolutely no statement whatsoever. Therefore, let's paint, or let's put up some photographs to try and make people feel as though they're entering a building of some merit. But in terms of the entrance, well, yeah, okay, it is really not terribly impressive. There again, you could say if we spent a huge amount of money on a grand entrance, people, why are you wasting all of that money? So it's two sides to every coin, aren't there? This was the Davis, the Hans Fowler Price meeting room above the portico of the town. Still there, in use as a meeting room now, but this was the original council chamber. Then, in the 1920s, this became the council chamber, sometimes referred to as the borough chamber, which is inaccurate. This was the Fry Patterson Jones extension, and you can see very much of that era. With a carpet that looks as though it's straight out of the saloon bar of some pub, but there we are. And interesting for those who are interested in such minor details, these uplighters are the original Crow and Green uplighters. They were a local firm of electrical engineers, electricians, who made lights for two big institutions in Weston, this one and the Winter Gardens Pavilion. And those in the pavilion, if you've not yet been in there, have been absolutely stunningly restored, and the copper, the original copper, has been taken back to its pristine condition. So do go into the Winter Gardens Pavilion sometime and have a look, and perhaps the council will follow the example set by the college. This then became the next council chamber inside the town hall. This is where North Somerset Council now meets, in what was the assembly room, the room that had the big plaque to Archdeacon Law. And this shows a change in what town halls, the modus operandi of town halls nowadays. In these days, when town halls were built in Victorian days, they always had assembly rooms. And those rooms were literally a place where the public could assemble. This is where events were held, it's where dances were held, it's where concerts were held, and the big civic town halls always had an enormous pipe organ at the end of and they were really, and very often the assembly room was run by a commercial organisation, not by the council at all. They were often two completely separate organisations. Now, of course, what's happened is that these rooms have been supplanted by other facilities, theatres and so on, and have been converted into other uses. So the days when everybody would have naturally gone into a town hall no longer exist. Because you only nowadays go into a town hall if you're going in to pay something, see someone, complain about something, go and report a death, go and report but nobody would go into a town hall today for enjoyment. People just don't do it because the rooms are no longer used for that purpose. A great pity, really. But again, that's the way it is. And if you look up, I think there's something quite impressive about the old town hall. It's a building which certainly historic England feel ought to be floodlit, and indeed it was once floodlit, and then about 7 years ago they decided to take the floodlights away to save a bit of money. Have we got to such a state of civic pride where we take floodlighting away because we've got to pay the bill for putting a few bob in the meter? And great pity, because it is at night time quite an impressive building. And not only was it a town hall and an assembly room, but it was a place where police could lock up those who were transgressing the law. And these were the cells. They are still there. I don't think they're in, well, I went in them a couple of weeks ago, there wasn't anybody, there was no skeleton in there. It's where in the town hall, the facilities department just chuck everything, they don't know where else to put it. So the cells are still there. And here's an interesting thing. History is often repeating itself. Where are the police now stationed in Weston-super-Mare? Back in the town hall. So we're constantly reinventing the wheel, aren't we? Then the council or the commissioners decided Weston needed a proper water supply. Many people didn't want to pay a water rate. They had their wells. They said, well, why do we need fresh water? Well, a touch of cholera soon impressed people of the need to have a proper water supply, fresh water supply, and the commissioners began to create a waterworks. First one was a private waterworks up on the Shrubbery. This built by somebody who called herself Lady Rook, but she wasn't. She lived in Villa Rosa, and she built this water tower, which is literally a tank up here on stilts, and built to make it look as though it's a bit sort of fanciful castle. But it's a water tank, and she supplied the water to people in the newly developed area known as the Shrubbery. Then the commissioners began to bring water in from Banwell, from River Banwell, from the springs there, pump it up the hill, create a reservoir at the top of Montpellier, and then allow the water to come down by gravity to the houses at the bottom of it. And then a bit later, another reservoir on the top of Worldbury Hill, again to pump water up, and then gravity allows it to come down. And this was all at the behest of a local authority. Remember, in those days, even though the Victorians were great people for providing commercial services, there was early council involvement as well. Here was the last meeting of the town commissioners. They ceased to function in 1891. These are the worthy gentlemen. You'll notice where they are, sat in front of something called a free library. Here's another facility. Now, this was only a very, very short-term free library. Can anyone tell me where it is?
Grove House?
It's Grove House. Of course, before Grove House was bombed, the Smith Pigots had recently moved out, and the council took over the garden, turned it into a public park, and the house became, for a very short time, a free library. And here we see the commissioners having their very final meeting there. And again, how history repeats itself. This is where the town council meets today. So it's sort of gone back into the place where the commissioners were then meeting. And this man in the middle, he was the last chairman of the commissioners, and Samuel Harvey, he became the first chairman of the new Urban District Council. Here he is, first chairman of the UDC, 1894. It was some years later, 1937, when Henry Butt became the first mayor of Weston. Weston moved from being a commissioner's town to an urban district council to a borough council as it got larger and larger and took on more and more duties. Now you see, 1937, here's Henry Butt in Grove Park in the bandstand receiving the Royal Charter, creating Weston as above the Charter of Incorporation. And you can see it's taking on all the airs and graces of civic splendour. It had just been invented. you know the British thing, you only need to do something twice, and it's a tradition, so, and there it is. It's all the hints of Gilbert and Sullivan and Edward VII, and but here all the great and the good from around and about have come to see the Marquis of Bath hand over the charter. He was the Lord Lieutenant.
Which year was that? Sorry, John.
1937. So, a very quick resume. I put the years that the authorities remained in existence because I think it's a bit telling. The Town Commissioners operated for 52 years. The Urban District Council operated for 43 years. Parliament changed it to a Borough Council, which survived another 37 years. Then the government changed that and got rid of the whole thing, subsumed Weston into a new invention called Woodspring, abolished the county of Somerset at this end of Somerset, created a new county called Avon. The whole of that managed to last 22 years before it was yet again abolished, and North Somerset, which had been Woodspring, was turned into a unitary authority, though is a bit embarrassed, doesn't quite know what to call itself, because there is still a county of Somerset, and there's only one lieutenancy and there's only one shrievalty. But here we are, and North Somerset is now 21 years of age. So the rate of change, you can see the pattern there. So I just throw out the question: how long before North Somerset meets its end? Who knows? The heraldry is a good indicator of civic pride as well. If you look top left, it's the first coat of arms is a badge, is more the word. Top left, you can see what it is. It's fish, it's a setting sun, it's trees, it's blue water. Okay, that's the badge of the commissioners and the early urban district. The urban district then decided, no, we're a town, so we must have a proper coat of arms. We'll pay the College of Arms to design one for it, or we'll pay an artist to design one, pay the fee to the College of Arms and they'll approve it. So this is our first proper one, incorporating the old badge with a helmet on top and steep holm on top and a seagull, no doubt pooing everywhere as it flies across. Supported by two local people, a fisherman and somebody who's meant to look like an ancient Briton, but is rather tall and slim and trimmed beard. Right? It doesn't look terribly aggressive, but those are the supporters. At some stage we'd invented, I'm not quite sure when, but at some stage we invented the motto, ever forward. I suspect this was a sop to Birmingham, because the motto on Birmingham coat of arms is forward. Weston had become the seaside resort for Birmingham, therefore if Birmingham's forward, we are ever forward. I think there's a bit of a joke there. Heraldry often plays jokes. The sea underneath and Worldbury Hill there. Then in 1960, pretty late, 1960, the council decided that the coat of arms really wasn't terribly heraldically correct, particularly having supported. So it redesigned a much better piece of heraldry there. I'll explain that in a minute. But it's interesting looking at the bottom line, because the county of Somerset has this wonderful heraldic device, bottom left. The county of Avon, regardless of what you think of Avon or don't think of Avon, and I won't go into it now, it did create one really good thing, and that was an heraldic device. Because Avon was responsible for creating a completely new beast called the sea stag. It was a combination, as you can see, of a fish and a stag. It had never been used in heraldry before, and Avon created this, and then Avon was abolished, but heraldically the sea stag had been established. Avon must have really thought it was going to really be something. After that, well, heraldically we were never really convinced about things. Woodspring, when it came into being, paid a lot of money to have these letter W's arranged. There were 5 letter W's to represent Weston, Axbridge, Long Ashton, Portishead, Clevedon as the former authorities which made up Woodspring. Then when Woodspring and Avon were abolished, North Somerset, because it's in Somerset and it's north of Somerset, decided it would have the Somerset Dragon But just look at those. Some of those heraldic devices ooze confidence, and some are rather apologetic. Then, of course, all the paraphernalia that goes with it, civic insignia. Please do not call it regalia, only kings and queens wear regalia. Civic insignia, mayors and chairmen of councils, maces, and mayors being ever so important. And so we run around in red robes or blue robes, thinking it's terribly ancient, but actually the robes, all the blue robes and the scarlet robe, the plum robes were given by Mr. Brenner from the Grand Pier. They're not terribly old, but as I said, tradition starts and everybody follows along. The mace actually is wonderful. That's a proper silver thing. It's in Grove House now and represents the Queen's authority. Now here's the modern Western arms, really rather good. We've got that original shield. The supporters, the lion and the wolf, are from the Smith and the Piggott families. And around the neck, the collars are from the previous lords of the manor, the Arthur family and the Winter family. So artistically and heraldically, this is a really good piece of heraldic art. The hill is Worlbury Hill, and these little markings are meant to represent the fortress on the top of Worlbury. They are the piles of stone. So everything in that emblazonment is of historical significance. So it's, I think, a rather good coat of arms. And to end the heraldry, I just look at these two. On the right is the Somerset dragon. This is a fierce dragon breathing fire and brimstone. On the left is the North Somerset version, which is a rather effete little thing compared with the real Somerset dragon. Again, no message in that, I'm sure, but two representations of the same heraldic beast. So, the commissioners move on, bring out the dead. We have to bury people. Churches were the place where people got buried traditionally. If you were someone of note, you were buried inside the church. The flagstones of the nave were lifted, you went down. If you were not of particular note, you were buried in the churchyard, unless you were of note and could afford a big tomb. Otherwise, you just... Now, as the population was rising, particularly as the town population was rising, we had a really serious health problem. Where on earth do you stick the corpses? There are far too many of them, far too many people were dying, and far too many people were rotting, literally. And so, quite often in the churches, the stench of rotting corpses, which were only a few inches below the flagstones, in the graveyards, the bodies were coming out and bodily fluids were oozed. It was terribly, terribly unhygienic, because the only place you could bury people were in churchyards, or then in some of the big cities, some commercial cemeteries. So Parliament had to pass the Burial Act 1852, giving municipal authorities the right to open their own cemeteries. And Weston was pretty quick off the mark. 1856, only 4 years after legislation, opened its own cemetery in Milton Road. From that moment on, churches were no longer obliged to have burial grounds. Any church which has a burial ground that predates 1856 can instruct the district council to maintain that burial ground in perpetuity at local ratepayers' expense, which they do. Any church which does not have a burial ground, or has one which was created after 1856, cannot instruct the local authority to look after it. This is the first burial ground in Weston, the civic burial ground in Milton Road. Interesting picture. People came from far and wide because of the parkland setting. Cemeteries in those days served two purposes. One, to bury the dead, and secondly, to be an open space of public recreation. You went walking around the graveyard. Trees were planted, shrubs were planted. They were pleasant places to while away a Sunday afternoon walking. And you look at the difference between Milton Road Cemetery today and Weston Crematorium, who goes out to Ebden Road for a pleasant afternoon's wander around? It has no design to it at all, does it? Where the old cemetery is a very pleasant. Even the tree, this monkey puzzle tree, it actually drew crowds from across England who came to see it. It was considered to be a really important tree, and books were published of all the different plantings there. The chapel is amusing because there are two chapels. One for those who died of the established church, the Church of England, and so they could meet their Maker through one chapel. But if you were non-conformist, you couldn't go to your Maker via the Church of England. You could only go to your Maker via the non-conformist chapel, which was next door. But the Bishop of Bath and Wells gave his agreement for the non-conformist chapel to be built next door, providing it was at least 6 inches away from the Anglican chapel. So those in the Church of England going off to heaven would not be contaminated by those who are going via non-conformity. The non-conformist chapel has since been removed, and the only one there now, which is used by whoever wants to, is the Anglican chapel. And here it is. It's a nice little building. The other chapel would have been on the left of the spire. That's gone. 2 interesting features here. The bell, it is from Queen Charlotte's Chapel in London, dated 1766. Why it came to Weston Cemetery, we have no idea. I suspect it was an early 19th century version of eBay. The Queen's Chapel had been turned into a theatre of all things, and the bell was got rid of, and Weston needed a... Why pay to have one made when you can pick one up second-hand for next to nothing? And so it came to Weston, and is there now and can be run in the belfry. The yew trees. All graveyards traditionally have yew trees because they are part and parcel of the death process. And here in Weston, I don't know how many of you know, but these yews are clipped each year, and the fresh clippings are taken, these nice pale fresh green clippings, are taken into the chapel where they are laid on the floor to dry out for a few days, and then a pharmaceutical company comes and buys them to turn them into medicine for the treatment of cancer. So here is something quite amazing, that from a cemetery, from yew trees which are significant of death, should come life through the mere cuttings of these yew trees in Weston Cemetery. I think that's a rather... The town council doesn't make a couple of £100 at all, but it's a rather nice idea, I think, that from just clipping these yews in Weston Cemetery, we help people gain length in their lives. These are the churches in Weston which have cemeteries. St John's, the parish church in Weston, St Martinwell, Emmanuel, which was built just before the Municipal Burial Act, and both St Nicholas's in Uphill, the old church on the hill, and the new church down in the village. These places have burial grounds which are maintained at public expense, not at parochial church council expense. The cemetery in Weston soon became overpopulated. The original cemetery up at the top, the 1856 cemetery, and so a plan was created in 1915 to acquire part of the Capel estate in the southern part of what is now a cemetery. Here is Manor Road. There were 2 big properties in Manor Road. Ashcombe House, which some of you will remember as the maternity hospital. Nowadays it's gone, the drive goes up to there, and there are modern 1990s houses there. Manor Farm has gone, and Manor Road is largely sort of 1920s, 30s development. The approach to the Capel Mansion, Ashcombe House, came via the junction of Ashcombe Road and Milton Road. The modern lower gate lodge into the cemetery was not built as a cemetery gate lodge, it was built as the gate lodge to Ashcombe House. That's how you drove into Ashcombe House. Land was acquired from the estate to create an extension to the graveyard, and then Ashcombe House during the First War became a military hospital, and then after the war became a maternity hospital and has since gone. And all the rest of that land has been developed. So the cemetery today is the original one, this blue area, and moving out around here. So the upper lodge there, which was built for the cemetery, and the lower lodge, which is called the cemetery's lower lodge, but was never ever built for that purpose. It was the gatekeeper to the Capel House, Ashcombe House. Now, what many people don't realise is that Weston was still rising in population. A lot of people were coming to Weston to die, and they did it very well. They still do. People come here in the last few years of existence and potter off. So we have to bury them. Nowadays we can burn them, but then we buried them, and we still haven't got enough room. So land was earmarked. It's in poor condition, but it shows an area between Clifton Road here, Severn Road there, and this was going to be the new cemetery going out to the railway line, which goes down by the Drove Road Bridge. That was going to become a new cemetery for Weston, and people were up in arms down there. This was favoured South Ward. They weren't going to have a cemetery in their midst, and the council quickly scotched that idea. The church, as I said earlier, whilst it's of little significance now in ordering the way in which a town works, the church, certainly in the 19th century, was hugely important because of the association people had with it and with the different denominations, and it very much helped the process of thinking by different groups of people who were associated with the different strands of Christianity. And I mean, in our lifetime, we can think, can't we, very easily of the recent influence of association with sectarianism in Northern Ireland. All of that helped to create the way you think about life, and much the same way as in the Middle East, in the two main strands of Islam. But it was the same there. Not quite so violent, but there were times of violence. So basically, you were either church or chapel. You were either impressed by Gothic architecture, mock Gothic, or classical architecture. You were either impressed by sacrament, the Mass, the Eucharist, or by the word, tub thumping from the pulpit, the altar or the pulpit. Now, as I said, it tends to be a bit esoteric nowadays, a bit academic, but it was hugely important then. You tended to find, not always, but you tended to find that the merchant classes, the rising trade class, were generally of the non-conformist persuasion. So you found a lot of shopkeepers were Methodist, and a lot of the old establishment were Anglican. And we began to see these differences in the way people congregated amongst themselves and began to think. The second church in Weston to be built was Emmanuel by a company called Manners and Gill from Bath, 1846. Interesting reason why this church was indeed built. It was built because St John's was then the only church in Weston, the Anglican church, and it wasn't large enough to accommodate all the people in this growing town. The congregation there, the rector and the parochial church council, thought they needed to build a second Anglican church for two reasons. Partly because St John's wasn't large enough to contain everyone, partly because it was thought that the sort of people who were living down in the growing lower part of the town were not actually of a sufficiently socially high enough standard to be going to St John's. And therefore they really needed to have a church for the lower orders. But the Church of England was a little worried that some of these working class people were going to Methodist chapels, and that really wasn't on. So they would need to build a second Anglican church for the poorer classes. And so Emmanuel fitted that bill. Not the way we think nowadays, but that's certainly the way people did think then. This is the way that the nonconformists wanted to worship, in simple classical building. This is a conjectured picture. This is what is thought to be the independent chapel in York Street. There's not a stone left there now of that. Here's the next great Methodist chapel, 1846. You can see what it is now. The picture on the right, it's Barclays Bank. Look very carefully. You can just pick out the tower. You can pick out the facade here. There's the tower, there's the tower. 1846, but almost overnight it wasn't large enough. This was the era of Wesley. This was the era of preachers preaching to thousands. And also, it was the era when there wasn't that much entertainment. So go and hear a preacher. That was entertainment. That drew the crowds in. So they had to move from Regent Street to a brand new church, the Victoria Methodist Church. And this was the new, very tall, very high, almost Anglican city-type building. Unfortunately, good old Western tradition took over in 1930 and it went up in flames. So that was the end of Victoria Methodist Church. Behind it, fortunately, didn't catch fire, was Whitecross House. Remember I told you in the previous lecture that was the headquarters of the Whitecross estate, one of the ancient houses in Weston. This was the replacement. This is the 1930s replacement in really good quality ham stone, not a Western stone at all, with I think a really, really impressive bell tower. It's of cathedral proportion. But one has to ask oneself, what on earth are the Methodists doing building a bell tower for? There are no bells in it. There's only one church which by law must have a bell, and that's the Church of England. Because the Church of England is the established church. It cannot be exclusive. Everybody who lives in a parish has the absolute right to attend an Anglican church service, and every parishioner has the right to attend an annual vestry meeting. You imagine if thousands in each parish turned up to normally about a dozen turn up. And the reason why Anglican churches must have a bell is to ring the bell to announce that divine service is being held, because should you wish to attend, you have the right to attend. No other church must have a bell. But here's this wonderful, wonderful bell tower on the Methodist church. There's never ever been a bell in it, but I think it is a handsome bit of 1930s architecture. Underrated. Back into the town, there were lots of non-conformist chapels being built. Here's an independent chapel in the middle of High Street, and the shot on the right-hand side shows all that's left of it today. Cambridge Place, which I still call Woolworths, and it's the pound shop. This bit on the right is that bit there. That is the non-conformist chapel in the middle of High Street. Then the Baptists come along, and their first chapel, Hans Fowler Price's conversion, even the conversion of Wadham Street Baptist Church, and then his wonderful Bristol Road Baptist Church, which has, it's a bit warm in here, isn't it? Yes. Let me use this very well designed. Wow. Which has that minaret. Not quite sure why a Baptist chapel has a minaret on it, but there we are. And as I told you last week, the Roman Catholics had to build their chapel, their first church up on the hill, away from the rest of the town, because they were Catholics, and Catholics were a bit sort of beyond redemption, really, because they were a bit close to the French. They were a bit sort of republican and given to revolution and hot-bloodedness. What did we have the Reformation for? Guy Fawkes, nasty chap, Catholics were. So there was their church, 1858, tucked away on the hill, until Roman Catholicism became sort of almost all right in the 1920s, and they could build their own big church down in the town, call it Corpus Christi, which wouldn't offend anyone by then, and put a front to it which was definitely Italianate, made no pretense to being English at all. The difference between High Church and Low Church, I mean, All Saints in Weston, smells and bells, emphasis on music and acoustics. Right up to the modern day, when churches in the what I call the Tesco School of Architecture find it very difficult to actually see the difference between a supermarket and a place of worship, other than a cross stuck on the top of one, St Mark's out of Whirl, or the Baptist Church at Milton. Every so often a person of great stature comes to Weston, only infrequently, but once in every so often. The man on the right is George Bodley. George Bodley was president of the British Institute of Architects, a gold medalist. He was the architect of Washington Cathedral, a big cathedral in Washington DC, the National Cathedral. He also built All Saints in Weston. He was a great mason. Of course, there's a great link between branches of ecclesiology then and the Masonic Brotherhood. And he came to Weston at the invitation of the Masons to build All Saints, and of course in the procession went past the Masonic Lodge, which Hans Fowler Price, also a Mason, had built, which has more recently become the Constitutional Club. So lots of Masonic links there. But George Bodley, one of England's greatest 19th century architects, here building something in Weston. And all sorts of people are linked with the Masonic growth in the town. Again, this is part of town growth. William Baedeker, whose cousin had compiled the great German railway guides, which gave their name to the Baedeker raids, because ostensibly the Luftwaffe was using railway guides to bomb English railway lines. James Dare, who was the person who created the very first Western Mercury, and there is the very first Western Mercury, and the Earl of Cavan, who had his house built at the top of Manor Road, the Lodge, not built for the later family that went to live there, but the Earl of Cavan. And the Earl of Cavan and William Baedeker and James Dare, they were very, very evangelical Christians, and they were also very strong Masons. Meanwhile, lots of the local merchants became Methodists, and you can see them. These are part of the Western worthies, as we call them, and you'll see these original paintings in the museum today. These are just 6 of them with their occupations. And of course, trade. A lot of people were making their money out of trade, particularly out of shops and businesses and banks. This is where people made their money, in the town centres. And don't forget, in those days, most shops were locally owned. They weren't part of big corporations. High streets now have been killed off by national chains. Very, very difficult to find any local entrepreneur still operating a shop in a high street in England today. But this is Walker and Lane in High Street. Education, very, very important. The first national school, the national school was run by the Church of England. The British school was run by the nonconformist churches. And here's the national school, 1846, which later became known as St John's School. On the right, on this print, it's Lower Church Road with St John's Church in the distance. So yes, you have spotted, this is where the college would later be built. So here we have the first church school, not public school in the American sense of the word public. The British, we use the word, well, our public schools are not at all public, but you know, a public school where the public can go. That had not been introduced until the 1870s. So 1846, the church is running education. And this is the end of it. This is the 1846 church school, not an 1846 photograph, but you can see looking up Lower Church Road, a row of hotels which was to be removed just about 3 years after this photograph was taken in order to build the new college. In fact, I took that photograph when I was a student at the college in 1963. Yes, okay. The nonconformists built the British School, and this is the building which is still there, being converted into housing in Hopkins Street. Most of the schools in Weston, there were lots and lots of them, were private. And here was the largest private school in Weston, the College, 1854. Very handsome building. If you look very carefully at it, look at where the central doorway is, the window formations, the 3 stories. It's clearly on the beach. This is what it became. It was converted in 1889 into a hotel. Look very carefully. This is the original school. And it had this sort of Scottish baronial thing stuck on either side, and it went up a story or two. And it turned into, well, it's probably the only building in Weston which actually looks like a grand hotel. It has that, even though it was a boys' school to start with. And there it is, still proudly on the seafront. What it's like inside, I leave others to judge. In education, 2 people here really played a significant and national role. Archdeacon George Denison was the vicar of East Brent. He believed fervently that education should remain in the hands of the church and the state should have nothing to do with it. In 1874, the government passed the Education Act, which allowed councils to build state schools. Denison, by his oratory, kept Weston 20 years behind the times. It took we were almost out of the 19th century before Weston built its first state school. George Denison, he was a hard-working, fully committed priest who firmly believed the state had no role in education. He was, in many respects, a great man. I mean, he was a farmer come priest. He is the man who organised an event in East Brent, and the entire world adopted it, called Harvest Home, where all the squire and the farmers and peasants could come together once a year, sit in a marquee on trestle tables, all together, eat the same food, drink the same cider, eat the same cheese. He also branded a cheese called cheddar, got all the farmers together to market it. He was a very clever man, but he believed the state should not interfere in things. George Denison, look at those eyes, a determined man. And on the right, Professor Francis Newman, who was one of the leading mathematicians in Cambridge, fervent believer in state education, who preached in St John's on the need for, he wasn't a priest, preached in St John's on the need for the state to play its full role in education. And his brother is a saint, I mean a real saint. His brother is John Henry Newman, Cardinal Newman, who wrote The Dream of Gerontius. But they were arch enemies. He did not believe in Roman Catholic. His brother had been an Anglican archdeacon and became a Roman Catholic prelate. And he and Francis Newman were poles apart. Francis Newman lived in Southside in Weston. So 2 great minds from different ends of the spectrum in Weston. We just don't have these great intellectual powerhouses in Weston, apart from this place, which is obviously an intellectual powerhouse. So, 1895, we at last get our first state school, and this is St John. This is Waddescott, built by or designed by Hans Fowler Price in what I'm reliably informed is the Prussian style of architecture. It's very Gothic. It's somewhat Jacobean. It's a great sort of pile of interesting architecture. A wonderful building. In modern terms, probably hell to teach in. Rooms all the wrong sizes and so on. But it's a building of some significance, and it makes a statement about state education in Weston. And there it is, a building to be reckoned with. Hans Fowler Price's lesser school in terms of architecture is just down the road in Locking Road, the Locking Road School, which became Windsor Girls' School, which became Wyvern Lower School, and is now has now been converted into flats. And I used to teach there, and the idea of teaching in a school surrounded by gardens and lawns, that would have been really rather pleasant playgrounds then. And always attention to this lovely detail of bell towers and air vents. The one on the left is Walliscote School, the one on the right I sketched is the Locking Road School, and the other two Christchurch School. Then coming right up to date, modern times, 1930s, we build a grammar school in Weston-super-Mare in Broad Oak Road in that new Art Deco style. Boys on one side, girls on the other side. This was in the days when people were bussed into Weston for secondary education because the grammar school provided the great education for this region, as opposed to nowadays everybody gets in a bus and goes out to church or out, not every, I exaggerate, but the grammar school certainly was a seat of learning, till of course that was abolished and became part of the new comprehensive system, and then the building was demolished to make way for today's Broad Oak School. Lots of private schools, certainly after the war, went completely bust. No longer were they making financial headway, nor were they making social headway. Their days are gone. And so Kingsholm School, the top of Arundel Road, that was taken down, that became a block of flats. Lara Trade School in South Road. St Peter's in St Peter's Avenue, no longer there. This is where John Cleese was educated, this is where Roald Dahl was educated, but there's absolutely not a single brick left there, which gives the town council a problem, because one of the blue plaques we want to put up is about Roald Dahl. Where on earth do you put it? And schools today, much brighter places to be educated in, aren't they? Plus, of course, Weston College. Now, Weston College, it has played a significant role, not just as a college, but throughout its history. So it started as the School of Science and Art. It was specifically designed for that purpose by Hans Fowler Price, with these huge windows, because it was a school of art. So this is where the light came in. And a building of great, listed building of great architectural merit, with a wonderful display. I mean, it must have been the most incredibly expensive project. How Hans Fowler Price got a commission for this sort of expenditure, I do not know. I mean, you could stand around with a camera and take easily 100 photographs of all the different bits and pieces, the green men, the capitals, the pottery work. It really is, I think, a staggeringly beautiful bit of educational architecture, wonderfully restored again by the college in recent years. This, of course, is back into the 60s. There it is, the Rove Hotels, the old St John's National School there, before all that came down. That is in removal, it's gone. The brick building there was then the college's engineering department. And that was the replacement. Brutal architecture, not brutal as an adjective. Brutal mean it's concrete. It's unadorned concrete, and that's what it was. Here was the lecture theatre. This was the big proper lecture theatre. Serried ranks of seating, great ceremonial staircase, concrete staircase, and car parking underneath. Brutal architecture, of course, went very quickly out of fashion. But here it was, making a significant impact on the Central Western, not just in terms of architecture, but probably much more importantly, and even more so today, in terms of its location. That's a way in which a town is very much affected. You imagine if the college had gone for the option when RAF Locking closed, of relocating all learning out onto the former RAF station with adequate sports facilities and abandon all of this site. What would the centre of Weston be like now? Certainly the demographics would be very, very different. So here was the college, and here it was to stay and to be converted. turned into a slightly more agreeable, well, no, that's very rude of me, a much more agreeable, given what it was like, and sort of rounded and painted and made a little more, well, you could embrace it a little more. The previous one you certainly couldn't. And of course we all know the college has gone on to embrace newer styles of architecture down in Loxton Road and in Locking Road and here where we sit today in the new university campus. Well, I make no apology for moving straight from education to punishment, but part of town life as well is about protecting yourselves, and here in early 19th century Weston it was pretty basic. It was about locking people up in stocks or the whipping post. The new ones were established in 1824. This is not an actual photograph, this is me playing around. There's the YMCA, but this is where the stocks were positioned, actually there at that very site in 1824, and next to them the whipping post, and this is the way people were treated. And I must say, I have seen one or two people in town that I think might benefit from an hour or two in the stocks, but oh dear, I'm being recorded, aren't I? No, I didn't mean it. These I find fascinating photographs, because these are actually photographs of weapons issued to Weston-super-Mare policemen. Now, we have a tendency to look back through rose-tinted spectacles about the good old days when everybody apparently was law-abiding. Everybody was nice, everybody spoke to one another. We never had to lock our front doors, did we? Because nobody ever stole anything. What we really need is a new war to make everybody nice again, except they weren't nice. They were no nicer then than they are now. Those sabres had to be issued to policemen in Weston who were on nighttime duty to protect themselves from the thugs who would attack them. So you imagine today, if we had to issue local policemen on a Saturday night in Regent Street with swords to keep order. You know, how often do the police in Weston draw truncheons? If the chief inspector has 3 people arrested on a Saturday night, that's been busy. And we've got to get things in proportion. And those people who are interested in history, I think it's a duty of historians to tell the truth, not to tell it as we would like it to have been. Here are the local police on Cutlass Parade, actually being trained in 1877 how to use their cutlasses against the ne'er-do-wells of Bristol and Weston-super-Mare. And here's where the police operated from, their police station in Oxford Street, which lasted from 1891 to 1936, and then the new police station, along with the magistrates' court, were opened in the 1930s. Unfortunately, I only have very vague memories of the police houses which used to be on this side of the police station and the magistrates' court. Such a pity. English Heritage say if they were still there, that would be considered to be a great architectural gem in the town. But unfortunately, the police station and the police houses were removed. The magistrates' court by Mr. Toomer, the Somerset County architect, remained, but the other buildings were lost. These are the details on the old magistrates' court. That Somerset Dragon, having lost one of its claws on the top of its. But this is architecture to be reckoned with, isn't it? You're not going to break that door down. It was once referred to as being in the fascist school of architecture, which is probably pushing it a bit far, but you know, you go in through that door, you're not coming out, you're going down. That's what it's saying, isn't it? That's the brutalist form of architecture which gave us the police station, and that is due to come down. The police have abandoned it now, and that building will go. But that's where the original police station and a couple of very, very Art Deco houses had been established. This is the new magistrates' court out on the outskirts of Weston. It's actually not in Weston, it's in St George's. And this amuses me. I'm not quite sure about this. Is that a lock-up? Is it a gents urina? I just don't know what it's quite interesting, isn't it, though? Other forms of public protection, fire brigade. So Weston established its fire station. Now look very carefully. That is the fire station, the first fire station set up in 1880. I'll show you exactly where it was. Look at this map. I've redrawn this map, colour-coded it, got rid of all the nonsense that went with it. Here is the town hall today. This today would be the centre shops. They weren't there then. This today is the old Magistrates' Court, which was then a market garden, and these are the greenhouses. This today is Rose Lawn. Those three properties are still there. The matching three properties on the opposite side of Wallacecote Grove Road are no longer there. That is the car park on the corner. These houses are still there. Wallacecote Grove Road was then a cul-de-sac. These houses were taken down to provide the car park for the Albert Memorial Hall. All of that has now gone and is the town hall extension. This is to become the new Dolphin Square. That is the new Church Square, which is just being created from what was originally a church square. We're reinventing things again. Here, at the side of the then town hall, was the fire engine house. So where you could drive into the town hall now, that gateway is still there, under the portico there, just straight on. This is where you would now, if you were going into the modern town hall to be married, this is the door that you would go through, which was the entrance to the fire engine house. So is there, as you go in for marriage, you are passing through the entrance into a flame, or into something was there to douse a flame. So that's as it was. And here is this very proud fire brigade standing underneath the portico, horse-drawn fire engine. And here they are in their new fire station in Oxford Street in 1910. This photograph taken in 1960 from what would be now the new Church Square. This is where Costa is being built. That is the central cinema just before it's about to be demolished. So there's the old fire station, and that is the same view as it will become. So Church Square here, the Costa corner of the new Dolphin Square there. So the fire station moves out to a completely new site in the Summerlands. This is the design for it, that's the actuality of it. Why built there? Because that's where a new road was going to be built. So they built the fire station, never built the new road. So the fire station is exactly where it ought not to be, because the new distributor road was never built. And if you go out along Locking Road, as you go out past what used to be the old dairy and is part of the college's technology department, on the right-hand side, just before you get to the Borough Arms pub, there's a field. That's where the road was going to come in from the new road, through there, into the Summerlands, so that it was never ever built, but the fire station was. Likewise, ambulances. Well, here's Weston's first ambulance in the 1890s, quickly superseded by a horse-drawn ambulance in 1905, then by the St John Ambulance Brigade, which operated the ambulance system in Oxford Street up until 1960, after which the county took over, and then the NHS took over, and St John moved out of Oxford Street, and the ambulance service moved into a new ambulance depot in Grove Road. Why was it built there? Because the second of the new roads was going to come in to here. There's going to be a big roundabout here, and one side of Clevedon Road and Brighton Road was going to be demolished as the new road ploughed onto the seafront to meet the Tropicana. The road was never built, but the ambulance station was. Hospitals. The first hospital in Weston, 1857. 7 beds to start with, quickly rose to 16, quickly rose to 20. That's our very first hospital. Then replaced, then another hospital halfway between Weston and Uphill, when a pub called the Halfway House was taken over and converted into a sanatorium in 1868, and it became the West of England Sanatorium, later known as the Royal Hospital here. And then in 1928, a new general hospital opened in the Boulevard, thanks to the fundraising efforts of Henry Butt. And the then Duke and Duchess of York, later King George VI, and his wife came to open it. I'm beginning to race now because I'm conscious that I did the same last week and got close to calling time. Here we built an isolation hospital in 1905 in Drove Road. We built it there because it was way out of the town. They built it next to the slaughterhouse. And people with communicable diseases were sent, and there they were lying in bed suffering from all these dreadful diseases, with the cattle being slaughtered in the next building. I mean, talk about making you feel worse. But that building is still there and in use for not health purposes, but certainly educational purposes. Probably, in terms of architecture, the most significant hospital building is what's now called the Signet Hospital, or the Birmingham Hospital Saturday Fund Hospital at Cewstoke. The most stunningly wonderful bit of Art Deco architecture, which really ought to be a five-star hotel where Monsieur Poirot takes his holidays every year. And our own new hospital, 1986, created in Uphill on what was going to be the end of another main road from the motorway. Every one of our emergency services was built because a road was going to be built towards it. Not one of those roads was ever constructed. Amazing. Another great person of national significance comes into Weston-super-Mare, Sir Joseph Bazalgette. And Sir Joseph Bazalgette, he was responsible for protecting London from the Great Stink. That wonderful year, 1850 something was it, when Parliament had to cease sitting because the smell rising from the Thames was so overpowering, legislators could not enact anything. The stink, because the Thames was an open sewer. Bazalgette was brought in to build the embankment and to create a sewerage system in London. The greatest civil engineer of his time. He came to Bristol to build the sewers, and whilst in Bristol, I don't know how, we managed to get him to come to Weston and build our sewer, which is still the basis of today's sewer, going back to Joseph. Something we don't like to think of, it's down there, it disappears, but Joseph Bazalgette, great engineer. This is where it ended up, Black Rock, which is why as children we never swam in the sea here. Of course that doesn't happen now. All the effluent from Weston is pumped under the river in a great pipe, down to the bleeding levels, where it's treated, macerated, it becomes pure water, and it's pumped back here and out again as completely treated, harmless water. Gas, we need gas. This doesn't go straight on from sewers, but no methane. But the production of gas in Weston, the very first gasworks, which that early town council established, here, next door to Emmanuel Church, at the bottom of that arrow is our first gasworks. Imagine the stink and the belching smoke in the middle of this nice new town, manufacturing coal gas. This photograph I took when the Costa building was just going up. Work had to cease because they found something poisonous in the ground. The engineers failed to consult an historian, and they brought people in from far and wide to test the samples, to send them for analysis in university, and I said to them, that's where our first gasworks were. Ah, that's why the soil was contaminated. Of course, in the 1840s they wouldn't have sent contaminated stuff, they'd have just left it there. They never thought to ask an historian, so they had to spend all that time analysing soil to work out why it was there. This became the new gasworks in 1856, and it lasted until 1968. And the gasworks in Drove Road, where we still have the gas holder, which of course now only holds North Sea gas, not coal gas no longer. From 1968 we stopped making our own town gas. And here, I love this photograph, this is the man sawing off the hooter. There will be some of my generation who will remember the sound of the hooter at midday, telling the workforce either to go home or to come back. And that was the hoot. Here he is sawing that off. The Gaslight Company had its offices and its workshop in Burlington Street, which has more. And this is the end of the gas holders, but still we have the gas lodge in Drove Road. And sorry, I meant to show something else. Anyhow, let's modernise ourselves and move to electricity. In those days, Weston manufactured its own electricity by coal. So the coal came in by train. So the electricity works had to be built next to the railway line, where we had a power station that made the electricity. Here is a photograph of that early electricity station. Well, where's that? Well, here's the aerial photograph of it. Let me explain. This is Locking Road. These are fields. This is Milton Road. This today is the doctor's surgery in Locking Road, and next door that became the tram depot, and that is today the Nuffield Gym. So there we are, with the very first, and of course it's next to the railway station, so there were sidings and the coal trains would come in to dump the coal in the power station. So, that's why the Sweat Building, that's why the electricity units are still there today. That's the first power station. That is where the power station was, and behind it is where all the big cables still come in to this day. Next door, because this is where electricity was being made, this is where the tram depot was built, because most of the electricity being generated was to drive the trams. And the tram depot was here, there was a T line, the trams went along Locking Road, Oxford Street, onto the seafront, one branch left down to the sanatorium, one branch right up to Burnbeck Pier. Just a simple effort. This is the tram depot, and that's where it is today. Here's the Western Tram. It almost looks as though it's a toy. Here it is on the seafront, coming past the town hall, and the tram, the single-decker tram, affectionately known as the toast rack, for reasons which are quite obvious, I think. And Beatrice Page, this wonderful woman, she's fairly elderly there, the very first female tram driver in Britain. Why? Because of the war, First War. And Weston's behind the times when it comes to a lot of social advancement, but women had the first tram job in Britain, in Weston. It all finished in 1937. This was a wonderful cartoon, everybody trying to jump on the last tram, because modern buses took over. This is outside the town hall, before we built a bus station, a dedicated bus station on the seafront. That was taken this year, but she's the only steam-powered bus in England and is owned by Crossville. Libraries were important. They were private to start with. This wonderful library at Smith's, above which you see those words, "Come and take choice of all my library, and so beguile thy sorrow," Shakespearean quote. Very soon, though, public libraries came into being. This is the Boulevard Public Library. That's the actuality of it. Wonderful carvings. And museums, from the original gas company building into the museum today. Theatres. You move from theatres on the Grand Pier, theatres at Nightstone, theatres in the Boulevard, to our first cinema, the Pedlar, replaced by the Odeon. Still has one of only 2 working cinema organs in the country. Even the Beatles played there for a whole week. The Gaumont Cinema in Regent Street, the Central Cinema, being replaced now by what? A cinema. So, we move now to the very end, and I'll whet your appetite for leading on from entertainment to what we're going to go through in the next couple of lectures. The architecture of Weston, which I believe is really quite something and unique, to the heydays of Weston, including the great schemes which fail to leave the drawing board, and some of them are incredible, right through to the modern times when we see heritage helping us to regenerate. So if you care to come for the next 2 lectures, that's next week, then this week and the following week, that's where we'll go right up to 2017. Thank you all very much. Sorry, I tend to race through the last bit. I run out of time.